people said Article 5. Here's why. Because Article 5, read it. It's an interesting article. It doesn't say what people think it says. The notion of an attack against one and an attack against all is there, but understand that all a NATO member is obligated to do is to consider whether or not they want to come to the assistance of the aggrieved party. So let's say Russia attacks Poland. NATO doesn't automatically go, we have to send forces now. We have to. Here's the schedule, deploy everything, mobilize. They get to go, Russia attacked Poland. Do I want to get involved? Because it's not automatic. It's, do I want to get involved? And if I do I want it to be military? Or can it be, I'll just say some nice words. So Article 5 isn't what people think it is. It's not everybody immediately rushing to the assistance. And that became true, apparent when you realize that even had this been a Russian missile, NATO wasn't going to war with Russia. Because one of the narratives that came out of Washington, D.C. is we're not going to start World War III over one tractor and two farmers. We're not going to kill the world because of one tractor and two farmers. But they knew it wasn't a Russian missile, which tells you that somebody in Ukraine, and let's put it this way, the S-300 is a radar-guided missile. Means it's locking on a radar beam. The beam usually is towards the missile that's firing. The Russian missiles are coming in from an east-west trajectory. This missile flew from the east to west, the same direction the Russian missiles are flying, which makes it interesting on how they're supposed to intercept the Russian missile, because normally you'd want them to fly this way. But the other thing is, it's got a guide on something, which means somebody turned on a radar and pointed it in the direction of Poland, so this missile tracked on that beam for impacting. This was a deliberate attack by Ukraine against Poland. Well, politically, it's an escalation. It's part and parcel of an ongoing, approach taken by NATO to increase the scope and scale of the military assistance to Ukraine. But it's an act of absolute desperation on the part of the West. First of all, the air defense systems that are currently deployed in Ukraine aren't working. All you have to do is take a look at the way the Russians are taking apart the energy grid of Ukraine and the strategic infrastructure of Ukraine. The Patriot missile is a political ploy by the United States to appear to be doing something to meet a Ukrainian need. But the Ukrainian need is like right now, or yesterday, or the day before that, when they were getting the crap blown out of them. And it's going to be the need they need tomorrow, next week, the week after that, and the week after that. Patriot is a complex system. First of all, does it work? It hasn't. Maybe it will now. Who knows? But we know during the Gulf War it didn't work, didn't shoot down the Iraqi Scuds. We know during Operation Iraqi Freedom, it shot down more Allied aircraft than Iraqi missiles. We know that the Patriot system that Saudi Arabia was using couldn't stop Houthi Iranian-supplied drones from taking out critical infrastructure of Saudi Arabia. So Patriot doesn't work. And so we're going to give it to Ukrainians. Now, we're not going to give them the most modern variant. That would be stupid, because that would be giving the Russians access to the very technology that we need if we ever are going to go to war with Russia. So we would be giving the Ukrainians older variants, which are less capable, but still technologically demanding and require a lot of guys. 90 men to man a single Patriot battery. The S-300, which is sort of the Soviet-era equivalent, 30 men. We need 3 times as many men to do this. Now, what does that tell you? That means that the footprint of the Patriot is massive. So when it deploys, this isn't a discrete covert deployment. This is a deployment that's going to leave a footprint that's going to be detectable in any number of ways. Imagery, electronics, you name it. And then the Russians are going to destroy it. So it's a death trap. It literally is a system that isn't going to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. You can't integrate the Patriot system into the existing Soviet air defense network of Ukraine. They're incompatible systems. So it's a standalone system. They're not going to give enough of them to create their own independent umbrella. So the system's going to come in. It's not going to be communicating with the Ukrainian system. There's going to be vulnerabilities, gaps. They're going to be detected and exploited by the Russians, who will destroy them. It just isn't going to work. The other thing is, it takes time to train these guys. Unless the United States has been carrying out a covert training program for Ukrainian missile defense artillerymen, this decision is going to trigger what is at a minimum 5 months. 5 months to train these guys. Now, the U.S. might have an accelerated training program, and knock 5 months down to say, 3 months. But what happens when you take training shortcuts? Again, anybody in the military knows this. There's a reason why you have a training syllabus. It's because the past has taught lessons that this thing needs to be trained. You have to get this much experience, and then you have to bring it in here, and you have to do this, and you build it up till you get the final product you want. But if you take shortcuts, that final product isn't going to be capable of doing the job, especially under duress. And understand, the moment the Patriot gets deployed to Ukraine in a combat environment, it's under duress. So any training shortcuts that are taken is just a guarantee that the Patriot's going to be destroyed even that much more quickly. So this is a tragic joke. We're offering something to Ukrainians that probably isn't ever going to be deployed, because I have a feeling that the ground war is going to be wrapped up. At least major part of the ground war is going to be wrapped up before the 5 months comes by. And we know this. I mean, we know it. So we're simply saying something to be seen as doing something, when the reality is there's nothing to be done. And if the Patriot is deployed, it's going to be destroyed. It's not a game changer at all, but it is an escalation, because then you have to ask yourself the next question. It's not going to work. Therefore, what's next? We know what the Ukrainians want. They want tanks, lots of modern tanks. Well, this is the scenario I see happening as we speak. The Economist just had a very interesting interview session with General Zelensky. Zelensky was present, but to the best of my knowledge, Zelensky didn't say a word. It was all about Zelensky, and you got to ask yourself, wait, what's going on here? Because if you study some of the Ukrainian Telegram channels, you got to be careful, because you never know which ones are spreading disinformation, or got to be careful when you read anything. But I read a lot of them, and the general theme that comes across is that Zelensky has positioned himself to be a political opponent of Zelensky in the coming election. Very similar in many ways to what General McClellan did in the American Civil War, where commander of the Army of the Potomac, went on to run against Abraham Lincoln in the 1863 election. So Zelensky has positioned himself to challenge Zelensky. I've written about this before too. I mean, back in September, I believe, I think September, October, there was a New Yorker article that could only have been written if the National Security Advisor, which means the President of the United States, approved it to be written, because there were a lot of people talking by name about things that would normally get you put in jail. So the fact that they were talking about it in a way that identified them without fear of consequence means somebody approved it, somebody greenlighted it, somebody gave them permission to speak. And the theme of that article was the de-emphasizing Zelensky and emphasizing the Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the Ukrainian military as the real power in Ukraine. And the Economist article interview did the same thing. I mean, the decision maker is Zelensky. Zelensky's a non-player. And Zelensky said some very interesting things. He said that, I mean, as any general would say, cockily, I can beat these guys. I can beat them. I got them. But you got to give me, and here comes the hard part, 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500. You got to give me an army. Got to give me the army I don't have. I used to have the army, but they're all dead now. I blew them all up in Kherson and Kharkiv and Bakhmut. They don't exist anymore. So for me to win, and for him, victory was he needs an army that he says can sally forth around 90 kilometers and seize the city of Melitopol, which would sever the land bridge between Crimea and the Donbass and Mother Russia, and allow the Ukrainians then to start focusing fires on Crimea proper and threaten Crimea and take Crimea. I mean, it reminds me a lot of Adolf Hitler in that movie Downfall, in the final bunker scene where, you know, he's sitting there and he's looking at the map and where's Steiner? Where's Wink? I need an attack here. I need these divisions to come and they need to attack here, and these guys need to come down here. And everybody's going,
he even says we need to retake the oil fields in Romania.
Retake the oil fields. Yeah, we can do that. But there were no divisions. They existed on paper only. Nothing could happen. And this is sort of what Zelensky has become. Sort of that figure, you know, I can do this, that, and the other thing, but only with the army that doesn't exist. And even if you wanted to provide us, couldn't be ready anytime soon, especially ready in time to deal with. And here's what he talked about: the Russians coming in. And he for the first time, you have a Ukrainian general saying, yeah, these guys know how to fight. They're pretty good. And if you don't give me what I need, we ain't going to stop them. We're going to get beat. That's pretty much the takeaway from the thing. We're going to get beat by these guys because we don't have what we need to stop them, and you're not willing to provide it to us. So this is setting the stage. And he's saying this in front of his president. The president's staying silent. You have to ask yourself, why? Well, because basically what he's saying is he lost us this war. His job as president was to get us all this equipment. He got us overcommitted in this conflict. We're not getting the equipment we need, and we're going to get beat. And everybody needs to understand that. We're going to get beat. And at some point in time, you know, that we're going to have to come up with a solution to this issue of getting beat, which means we're probably going to have to negotiate terms. He ain't going to be the one to do it. I am. He didn't say that. But that's and now listen to the Russians, the way the Russians have responded to this. They continue to be derisive of Zelensky. They say he's a Nazi leader. I mean, and when your strategic objective is denazification and you call the Zelensky government a Nazi regime, sort of tells you what the future of Zelensky is. There ain't no future. Meanwhile, when they speak about Zelensky, remember, Zelensky's no angel. This is a guy that sat there and took a selfie with Stepan Bandera's portrait in the background. So let's not pretend that he's not a Nazi, he's not any of the bad stuff, but the Russians aren't calling him out on that. They're saying he's a very effective leader. He's fought very bravely. We have respect for him, things of that nature. Why? Because the Russians politically can't sit down and negotiate with Zelensky. I mean, Vladimir Putin is not a dictator, and he is held hostage to the whim of the Russian people. At the end of the day. And, for him to, sit down and negotiate a peace with Zelensky would be a strategic defeat. Anything that left Zelensky in power would be a strategic defeat. But if you sit down and you dictate terms of surrender to the noble warrior, the man who put up a good fight, you legitimized every casualty Russia just took. You said all these losses were in a noble cause, and now we're ending the conflict against a noble warrior who is doing the right thing for his people, bringing this war to an end, bringing peace. And you've created a politically acceptable conflict termination narrative. And I think that's the direction. I think Zelensky recognizes this, and I think the Russians recognize this. The problem is that Zelensky still has a big power base. He's still there. He has the nationalists on his side because he's taken such a hardline position. So Zelensky has to be careful. He can't overplay his hand. But I think what we're seeing here, not enough resources for the objectives. Basically, turning a 1,000 kilometer front into a 2,000 kilometer front without doubling your forces, you ended up with 60 to 100 men per kilometer. That's just not enough to defend. Now Russia's rectified that. They brought in reinforcements. They've built up their defensive lines. You don't see any Ukrainian victories anymore because they're all dying. The Russian defenses are solidified. Now the Russians are going to go into the offense again. But what you don't want to do is win, then lose. And what I mean by that is, and there's lessons to be learned from World War II history. In the battles for Kharkov in 1943, the winter battles, between the fall of Stalingrad and the final, solidification of the battlefield, the Russians, I gosh, my history, I think it was Popov's tank army, penetrated and made a daring dash through the German lines. But then von Manstein, sends his boys in and they cut him behind, they hit him, and the army's destroyed, and the Soviets took a lot of casualties, and the Germans were able to, counterattack and restabilize the battlefield. Even though the Russians had tremendous numerical superiority. But, and what you don't want to do if you're the Russians at this point in time, especially if you believe Zelensky is a capable leader, is to overextend. And going to Lvov, I mean, you would have to thrust deep into Western Ukraine. How do you do that with the resources you have? Remember, every kilometer you advance, you also create 2 kilometers of flank cover that have to be protected. So you go in 40 kilometers advance. You don't just have guys 40 kilometers in. You have 2 flanks that are 40 kilometers long that have to be protected. And the more troops you send in, the wider that gets. The front, suddenly you're talking a lot of troops. And if you don't protect those flanks, you got all your combat power up front. Now the Ukrainians come in, smash out that arm, cut you off, and you've got Popov's tank army all over again getting wiped out. So I think Lvov, with the resources that Russia's putting on the battlefield right now, which I estimate to be around 700,000 troops, all told, I don't think Lvov can be taken with 700,000 troops if Russia's to do the other things, especially if Russia's going to secure. Remember, when you secure the Donbass and push 100 kilometers in, you're creating frontage that has to be defended. And if you go up and as you're going to have to do, because understand that you can't just hold Lugansk, the territory, you're going to have to push a couple 100 kilometers in, which means Kharkov is going to have to be taken. And Kharkov is a Russian city, which means you got to go a couple 100 kilometers past that to make sure that Kharkov doesn't get shelled by, and by the time you end up doing this, you've created some frontage. Now, if you do it right, you can actually reduce your frontage because there's a big loop going down from where the Russian Federation is through to Lugansk and then the Donbass. And actually, if you do a straight line up, you actually pivot in and you consolidate the line. So, using the Russian border as an anchor point, you can draw a line that keeps you a couple 100 kilometers away from the Donbass border that could, I think, realistically represent what the Russian objectives could be going down. But even with that consolidated line, you need troops to man that to prevent the Ukrainians from doing any. Because remember, if you're defending the line, the Ukrainians don't have to attack you all along the line. They just have to get, a point in the battlefield where they have momentary supremacy to break through. And if you haven't defended in depth, in addition to building up a defensive line, when they break through, they threaten your logistics, your resupply, and you suddenly collapse, and it's like a balloon deflating. Russia did that once in Kharkov. They don't want to do it again. So I don't think the Russians are going to get ahead of themselves, which means it's going to be a slow, methodical advance to achieve this. But when that's done, they may have sufficient forces at that point in time to make a run at Odessa. You can't go to Lvov without making a run at securing Odessa first. That's just stupid. You don't want to extend that way with a big force down here. You want to take Lvov, and then you're going to work up towards, or you want to take Odessa and then work up towards Lvov. But these are big frontages, require a lot of troops. So that's a long way of saying I don't think the Russians are going to be moving on Lvov. Although I've spoken to some Russian strategic thinkers that say this war doesn't end until Russian eyeballs are staring at Polish eyeballs right on the Ukrainian-Polish border. So we'll see. I'm just saying that it's a tougher proposition than it thinks. Now, if you have the total collapse of the Ukrainian armed forces, you suddenly create some opportunities that could have. But Western Ukraine is going to be openly hostile. There's real potential for guerrilla warfare in Western Ukraine. And I just don't think Russia wants to enter that kind of complication unless you're going to finish it that quick. What you don't want to do is slow roll into something and then end up like the United States and Iraq with developing insurgency that's going to be forever supplied out of Poland and the Baltics. And Russian troops are going to be dying, and it's going to get ugly because now you're going to have to go into the cities, kick down doors, and now you're American troops in Baghdad. It's the same thing. Russia doesn't want that. I don't think Russia needs that. I think that if Russia can take the territories, Odessa through Kharkiv, that little arc there, keep it far enough away and destroy the Ukrainian military, then they can resolve the rest of this with, with politics, not military.